You were live.
We're live. This is the Senate Education Committee, April 29th, a little bit after 1 o'clock. We're continuing our work on H4 54, the education reform legislation. We're going to do things slightly out of order from what would perhaps have been the most obvious, which might have been to have got St. James here going through the first part of the bill and then ease into the second part. But because of scheduling between us and the Finance Committee and the availability of Ezra and Julia now, we're going to move first to the looking for rates again. To recall, after our discussion on Friday, there was an interest in, kind of obvious, but an interest in seeing the weights applied to current districts. And Ezra worked on that. We used B2 as the model. As you recall, that's the one that added back in the high school weights, high school and middle school weight, and eliminated the weight for sparsity for districts with a population between 36 and 55. Is that right? Yeah. Although keeping that weight in, not the weight, but those numbers in there as a test for what constitutes a small group. So what we did was we took B2 and now, and everyone is calling it B2.1. Now, as it applies to just things change slightly when you learned this when you apply it to the existing districts. So why don't we start with? We all have the handout and the big posting rule, right?
Yes.
Under Ezra's name. Okay. So by the way, Ezra and then John will be here and we'll do the John's part of the bill. He's got a draft that we all have in front of us now. And then we'll go back and look up with that at the end. So we'll start with Ezra's work.
All right, for the record, Ezra Holden, Joint Fiscal Office. And if it's all right with the chair, I will share my screen. Yeah, correct. So. And so, as the chair mentioned, today we are going to be taking a look at one of the scenarios that I modeled for you all last week, Thursday, and applying that to all of the current law districts. And then after a brief presentation here, we will then turn to the provided handouts that you all have of all of the 119 districts. And I'll be on hand if you have questions about some of the changes or impacts that you see there. So we'll go ahead and get started. And again, Joint Fiscal Office, we are nonpartisan legislative office, not here to offer any policy recommendations for you all. So just want to remind everyone where we, some of the things that we kind of level set with, like we did on Thursday. So you'll recall fiscal year 2025's education payment is 1.88 billion. And that's an important figure to keep in mind because for this modeling, one of the requirements was that I constrain total spending to that 1.88 billion with the weights and the base. So that's an important context there. A term you'll see a lot, long-term weighted ADM, that refers to the long-term weighted average daily membership. And that's the weighted student count that drives the funding to a district from the base in this foundation formula. And then the modeling presented today will use a variety of weights. As the chair mentioned, you have well, we'll go into detail. I think it'll probably be easier for me to explain when I have the base and weights table up there, but we'll use the same set of weights, but apply them to two different constructs, one of which you saw the SBA construct last week, and today will be the current law 119 districts. And again, some abbreviations. FPL stands for federal poverty level, and those are students who are classified as experiencing economic disadvantage. And then you have EL, which are your English learner students. So those are just some local sets there. And so we'll just jump straight into an overview of the modeling here. So again, this is a repeat a bit from last week. The assumptions are the same as in we're using the fiscal year 2025 data. However, you'll see that now we're looking at current law districts, whereas previously that was VSBA districts. These models were built to hold the total education payment at fiscal year 2025, that 1.88 billion payment. And then the weights are additive, and they are a proportion of the base, not a set dollar amount. So if your base changes, all of the dollars generated by these weights will change. And so today's scenario is scenario B2.1. So that is acknowledging the fact that while this is the same scenario B2 that I presented to the committee on Thursday, the point one is signifying that you'll see there in italics your this has now been applied to current law districts instead of VSBA districts. And that actually changed the base amount versus the original B2. So I thought it appropriate to signify that this is a slightly different scenario, even though both of them are applying H454 weights constrained to the current education payment with the addition of pupil grade weights, which would be middle school and high school. You'll see down at the bottom there, grades 6 through 8 receive that 0.08 weight, whereas grades 9 through 12 receive the 0.12 weight. I've also restricted sparsity, as the chair mentioned at the beginning. So only fewer than 36 people per square mile is counted as a sparse district. And then applied all of this to current law districts. So
before you go on, like that, sir. So the weights at the bottom for grade 6 through 8, 9 through 12. The source of that was coined as real data, real costs. Who gave us those costs? Who gave us those factors? Was it?
So I believe that's provided by the Agency of Education,
Okay.
and that was a directive also from the chair to take those numbers as.
I just want to make sure that AOE's got their fingerprints on it. Thank you.
I'm not, by the way, I don't want to be clear. I wouldn't want to say that this, the agency's position is my position. They have data. The data gave us, they gave us.
Could we ask them again? Yeah. Now, because it's been months, I'm going to officially say that AOE needs to be in the room to answer questions so we can, if we expect to move quickly, it would be helpful if they're in the room. But I would like them to acknowledge that these real cost factors are accurate. Okay, that would be very helpful. We can move.
Yes, sir.
And maybe pretty Jerry can answer this one. The weights for high school and grades 6 through 8 and 9 through 12. Why are we giving them weights? Is it
Same reason. By the time you get to middle school, it's different cost structure.
because it costs a little bit more to educate those over, and it doesn't matter?
All right, so just a refresher, these are the basin weights that were for B2 applied to VSBA districts. So those H454 as passed by the House weights, so that would be your FPL of 1.02, your EL of 1.39, the small school weight of 0.21, and that sparsity weight of 0.13 are the numbers that were presented in the as passed 454. For scenario B2, we also, as directed, added in the grade weights, 6 and 8 and 9 through 12, as we've all just discussed. And sparsity, what that 36 to 55 people per square mile was zeroed out to restrict sparsity. However, as it currently stands on small schools, to receive a small school weight, you need to be within a sparse district, and that is still held true. So even if you're no longer getting that sparsity weight of 36 to 55 people per square mile, if you are in that sparsity zone, you would still be eligible for a small school weight. So that hasn't changed. And then again, the original scenario applied this to VSBA region. So you'll see here that the base would be 14,653. And then a student, if they met any of these requirements, would be able to add on a weight on top of that base. And
sorry to interrupt it, just something you had just mentioned there, with the sparsity weight and the small school weight. So I'm seeing zeros on the small school 101 to 250,
Mhm.
but if they have 36 to less than 55 people per square mile, but they have less than 100 people in their school, then they get the points.
no, so so you have to be considered. Okay, no, I'm sorry. So for the small school part, yes. So if you fell within that 36 to 55 people and had fewer than 100, then yes, you would get the small school weight. My apologies, I was thinking about the zero there for the sparsity. So yes, you would receive the 0.21 and then nothing for sparsity. However, if you were that same school, but were in an area with fewer than 36 people per square mile, you would receive the 0.21 weight for your students and the 0.13 weight for your students.
And that is just while they're at that school. So if they go from there to a high school, that gets dropped unless they're in sparsity.
Right. So a small school receives the small school weight, but a large school can still receive the sparsity weight if it's in a sparse district.
Thanks.
So, and this is what, again, presented on Thursday. So now I'll go to what's new for today, which is scenario B 2.1. So you'll notice that the description above is the same as B2. However, I've now added to read applied to current law districts. And you'll notice that actually the base has changed by about $90. And that's because what I found is that by actually applying sparsity to each of the 119 separate districts versus the 11 VSBA districts, there's actually an increase in sparsity. And so there were more districts that under VSBA were being pulled into an area that offset their small or their sparsity. Now allowed to kind of float on their own, so to speak, they were able to get that sparsity weight, increasing the number of long-term weighted ADM. You'll notice at the bottom there that 129,000, which on the prior slide you can see is about 128,000. So as the long-term weighted ADM has increased, the base has therefore decreased because you'll recall we're holding that spending bottom line payment at equal or constant at 1.88 billion. And so the base has gone down by about $90 because of this increase in sparsity. And just to have them side by side there, and you'll see that the weights are the same for these two scenarios. The only thing that's changed is that it's the district construct. And so, and this is something I touched upon Thursday, is that if you change the structure of your education system, that will impact things like sparsity because you're redrawing district lines and absorbing different populations inside of those lines. And so that impacts the number of long-term weighted pupils inside the district, therefore impacting the funding that that district is getting. So.
Yeah, can you go back?
Sure.
So the factors from the federal poverty index level and the English language, et cetera, on down. Again, I think these came from Dr. Colby.
Yes.
Yeah. I'd like to see if AOE agrees that these factors are accurate. And I'd like to know if, and going backwards just a step, if JFO agrees with these factors, these weights, based on the laws.
So I would not speak on whether or not I agree with them, as I don't have the education PhD as Dr. Colby does, and I haven't done the same level of analysis that Dr. Colby has with the with cost function analysis. So I wouldn't make a personal. I don't think that'd be JFO's position to make a comment on that work from the JFO perspective on Dr. Colby. I can't speak to what the agency would or wouldn't like to comment on Dr. Colby's work.
Yeah, it's two separate requests. The JFO has no position on the grade level cost increases or the weight factors, which are in this bill.
JFO does not have a position on these right now. This is Tammy's recommendation.
Yeah, no, I get that.
We're just asking for it, so.
No, I'm asking if that's what validating, that's where they can like to acknowledge that they are. I get
Well,
that.
they're not. Those numbers are different than what's in Tammy's thing. So, that's all.
I'm giving you understand.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, thanks, sir.
So if we'll move on to the overview of spending analysis by the current law districts. And so before kind of diving into the district by district analysis, I thought it might be helpful to have a high level snapshot of the county level. Now, these districts are not being organized or administered by county. They all stand on their own. However, I thought, just if you want to get a broad sweeping overview of where you might see funding flow in the state, this allows you to see that the Bennington County region is getting the largest relative increase at 23.8% for the county. And then Addison County is seeing the greatest relative decrease by about 13.7%. I'll note that school districts have been sorted based on the counties assigned to them in Agency of Education data. So you might find a district that you would say, well, that's in X county, not Y county. However, the chair and I have gone over this. It's been sorted by the agency. And so if they sorted it into a county, I've left it in that county. We haven't gone through and said, well, which county doesn't belong in? So if you do notice what you might call a county discrepancy, that could be the reason why you're seeing which one they're key to. And I'll also call out that, and you'll see this in a second, not every district within a county is going to see this change. For example, you could have a school district inside of Addison seeing an increase in their funding compared to FY25, vice versa with Bennington. However, as a whole, as a county, this is the relative change that they've seen.
It was like 12% increase statewide. Some was higher, some was lower.
Yes,
The average was 12.
exactly. And so, again, just want to lay out some considerations, such as that these estimates only reflect how different base and weight decisions would affect funding as constrained by the current education payment. Dr. Colby's recommendation was to spend, I believe, amounted to spending 1.914 billion. So if you took the same H454 weights, but Dr. Colby's recommendation of 15,033 as the base, you would spend more than 1.88. So this base and weights has been set to that 1.88 billion figure. And so playing into that, this doesn't reflect necessarily any research on appropriate funding levels, just what you would get if you were trying to stick with that $1.88 billion ed payment. And this only considers the education opportunity payment. And so there's no supplemental district spending, no categorical aid. Also, one of the requests for this scenario was to leave special education as the census block grant and not use any of the special education weights that Dr. Colby had discussed using. And then also, English learners are at 1.39 because due to the high level of data regression so if you're at a county at a district that has fewer than X number of students, they can't tell you the exact number because that would be piercing kind of the veil of privacy for those students. So that's why we couldn't use the level of English proficiency weights that Dr. Colby provided and had to use the 1.39 applied to all of them instead. So that's a level of detail that you'll notice when you compare weights from Dr. Colby versus the 1.39 presented here, that's because of that data privacy constraint that we're still working with the Agency of Education to still be able to work with. And so this is a chance, if you have any questions about those PowerPoint slides, I have a question slide here for you. And then otherwise, it would be an opportunity for you all to turn to the district printouts, sorted still by county.
Thank you.
Quick question for you. Compared to current law and the weights, can you refresh my memory as to what weights we currently apply to grades, like the grade levels and the sparsity levels?
Sure. So currently there are weights for the different grade levels. However, they're all tax capacity weights. So if you tried to take those weights, and I think, for example, secondary was 0.39, which if you plug that into a foundation formula, you're essentially saying that a high school student here would get 39% more. And so that's, for example, why you wouldn't want to take the tax capacity 0.39 for secondary and 0.36 for middle school students and plug them into this scenario that was a initial ask. And then, it's determined that that would not be probably what you would want to do. So that's why you see the 0.8 and 0.12, 0.08 and 0.12. And again, or not again, to terms of sparsity in current law, you have the I call them three different tiers of sparsity. So you see between 55 and 100 people. Then you have 36 to 55 people per square mile. And then you have fewer than 36. So in current law, those are all filled in. Each one is a different weight. However, again, they are tax capacity weights. So those all are categories in current law. However, the weights that you see there don't directly translate over to this foundation formula because that would be applied to the base and generating specific dollars and not just the ability to spend more. So I don't know if that
helps. Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, so the 12% is the actual number after bill back that we as a statewide spend on 12% more in high school than we do. So it's going to be actual spending plugged it into an actual number as it relates to distribution, 12%. As opposed to a 39%, which would have been wildly distorted.
Where does the 12% come from?
It comes from the report from the agency about the actual cost of running on, what we actually spend on high school versus what we actually spend on elementary.
So if there are no further questions about the slides themselves, now, if you haven't already, which I suspect that you all already have started looking, you can now go ahead and turn to your printout for scenario B2.1. And again, just to help orient you, if you haven't picked it up already, however, I suspect most of you have. So you'll see at the top here, you have the printout title. Again, a reminder that scenario B 2.1, the weights and some of the caveats that exist here. And then just to go through the columns briefly. So column A, you'll see columns A through C are in that fiscal year 25 current law. So that would be your counties and the districts, that's as they are today. And then your fiscal year 25 education payment. And again, those are the dollars that have been spent that are being spent this year. So column A is the counties, and they've been sorted alphabetically here, not by order of increases, decreases, or any other, or population, A, B, C, etc. And so you'll see current law districts again have been sorted within that. The education payment in column C, that's what that specific, so just starting at the top here, you'll look at column A, Addison, column B, you can see that within Addison County, you're now looking at Addison Central USD, number 55. And then column C is telling you that in FY 25, their education payment was a little over $40 million here. And then we have columns D and E, which you'll see are part of section B 2.1. And these are the new factors, what's coming out of this scenario here. So under this B 2.1 scenario, this same district, Addison Central USD number 55, would generate based on the base 2,201 long-term weighted ADM pupils. And that's the amount that would be multiplied against the base amount to generate the estimated education opportunity payment that you see in column E of roughly $32 million there. And then you'll see columns F and G are the change columns. So in column F, that would be E minus C. So your education opportunity payment minus your FY 25 payment, education payment. So if you have a negative there, that means that as modeled here, that district would receive less funding. If you have if it's positive, that means it would receive more funding compared to the FY 25 ed payment. And then column G is the relative change. So if you take that dollar change in column F over the C education payment, that's the percentage change that you're looking at. And then you'll notice where you have the break between the counties, you'll see the county total. Again, all these districts operate on their own. However, I thought it'd be helpful to just see countywide what the impact would be in dollars and relative change. And so that's those bolded and underlined totals there at the bottom. And then all the way on page 8 at the end, you'll see at the very bottom below Windsor, you have a statewide statewide row there, and that is letting you know the grand total FY 25 ed payment, the grand total statewide long-term weighted ADMs generated by this modeling, and the estimated education opportunity payment that would be generated, and the statewide total change and in dollars and percentage. So that's just to orient you when you're looking at this chart, what figures you're looking at. And so that's really all I have prepared for you all. Again, just the same resources that I mentioned on Thursday are here. So some JFO website resources, as well as the January 30th Colby testimony. You'll see that that third bullet from the JFO's website is the weighting update memo 4.8. Again, that was from Dr. Colby as well, the final one that went into H454 as passed the House. And yeah, that's really all I've prepared for you all today. I think the interest was in these printouts. So yes. Yeah.
Do you have any nonpartisan context or background as to why the grades were not included in H454 as passed by the House?
Yeah, I believe that Dr. Colby's research found that there was not a statistically meaningful difference between the grades and the spending. So I believe on the January 30th memo, there was a secondary weight of 0.25 for secondary students. However, with updated data for the April memo, that updated data, I believe, showed in her research that it was no longer statistically significant difference in the cost and outcomes in the grade level. So that's why it was struck, as far as I can recall.
And do you happen to remember what the research said about the two sparsity categories, 36 to 55 and 55 to 100?
Again, so I think that was the same, I believe that was the same reason there wasn't a statistical, difference with with that largest one. I'll point out that actually, I don't think, it's not me pointing out, I believe that there was still 36 to 55 sparsity under H54 has passed the House. And if you have your hand up from Thursday, that would be noted in there. The decision to remove it was a modeling request from the chair for this B2. That was not from Dr. Colby's work. That part was a request. Okay, thank you.
So I know for people, you actually have to look carefully at this for your districts. Because a large part of Bennington County shows up in Rutland County. As a couple of little towns in Rutland County, most of it in Bennington County, the whole thing ended up in Rutland because that's the way it got classified by AOE for whatever reason. So you just have to make sure that you look through this carefully and find all your districts, and at least in your own mind, make sure they're in the right place.
Yes, and just to clarify, in case you're wondering why some of these pages are half blank, I inserted page breaks so that you did not have a county split between the two pages. So there isn't anything missing. For example, on page 4, it's just broken out so that you're not trying to flip between the pages. So you're not missing anything, just trying to make it easier to see a whole county at once and not try to keep flipping back and forth. So just for some context on the blank spaces there. And again, that's all I have prepared. If there are any questions or.
Thank you. Like, want to make sure everybody. Okay. All right, good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good work. I know that was a lot of work. So thank you.
My pleasure.
John, what to go to? We could, if we can, if we have them, right? Yeah, why don't we'll do a little start and stop, I suspect. So we have that there, so we're gonna, okay, just get used to it, we'll jump on. Okay.
Is this one?
So just to keep track, this is a little part here we have to keep track of. You could just put at the top of this one, for your own sake, if you want to, you can put John. And then at the top of the other one, you can put that. And in the end, it will be that section first, followed by the section.
But Beth and John show, not the John and Beth.
What's that?
It's Beth and John show, not the John and Beth show.
Yes, it will be the John. Yes. So that has been busy with everybody else. That's so I guess we can just pick up and have you walk through the changes.
Yes, Beth St. James, Office of Legislative Counsel. I'm just waiting for the website to refresh.
Oh, okay.
So the education finance from H454 really would get tacked on to the end of 5.2.
Yes, yes, yes. We have the first X, I forgot the foot, in the old original House bill, I think we had the first meeting for the second.
What are we doing?
We're gonna go to the one that, where you wrote Beth at the top.
I'm waiting for your web there.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't know. Question trigger. Well, is the Zoom invite in an email or the calendar invite?
It was in the email. An email.
Okay. I think you could send it to me again. I'm sorry.
Well,
Okay, so on posted on your website, and wait, I hope you have in front of you is draft 5.2 with today's date on it and a timestamp of 12:56 p.m. Changes from the last draft we looked at are highlighted in yellow. So if there's no yellow highlighting, it's likely that there was no change, although it could be that I removed something and therefore there's highlighting. So, section 1, no changes. I removed per your, I shouldn't say no changes. There's no changes to what appears here. You all, on Friday decided to take out any of the, intent language that was related to a plan for next year or any future years. So that language has all been removed. Commission on the Future of Public Education. Don't believe. Actually, we did make a change. So the draft that you looked at on Friday, which I believe was 4.1, had the Commission on the Future of Public Education completing its work in August. And this draft has on page 13, line 5, has the commission completing its work on September 30th, 2025. And then a similar change to when the commission would cease to exist, bumping that out to match the deliverable date. So an extra 15 days here through October 15th, 2025 on page 14, lines 3 and 4. And then the School Boundary Task Force, so I'm on section 3, page 14, line 11. No changes to subsection A. One change to subsection B, and that is adding one new member appointed by the governor.
And that was, this is for the committee's consideration. It was to have, it would be 7 at that rate. This was, a few people have just talked about that this might make sense, so I put it in here for consideration. So we have 7 members, 3 in the House, 3 in the Senate, 1 in the administration, since this is in some ways 3.
If I could.
Yeah.
So my sense is that this bill speed is going to pick up, has picked up. So I think it's maybe appropriate to have a conversation about why no Bs are in this committee or why no superintendents are in this committee. Because that's like question number 1 I get out in the field. And I think that it would be helpful for everybody if we're really trying to level set.
Yeah.
Why this approach versus any other approach or.
Yeah, it's committee decision. I think, the legislature deals with very complex issues all the time. And we don't have other people sitting around the table with us as if they were legislators. This is among the complex things the legislature has done. This is not that, this is on the list, but it's not by a long shot the highest on the list. It's and maybe we're elected. It's our job as legislators. And I also think that having it be a legislative committee, you will then have, if there's agreement, you'll have real buy-in from within the body to help move the thing forward. And I also, I don't know, it's, I'm just expressing my view that it's a legislative function that it should be done by legislators.
Oh,
Not by unelected people.
Not trying to be facetious here, but
Yeah.
if it's done by legislators, should we then take out member appointed by the governor?
That's how I feel.
Good, that's fine.
I don't want to break the seal.
Yep.
I like was okay with
Yep.
just legislators.
So-
We need to live with it in
Yeah.
a certain way.
And I'd like to see actually 4. That
Four
way
from
we can
each.
have two, well, should be almost 250, like tripartisan now, aren't we? But that it let the 2 majority parties, I think that would be, that way you have equal setting at the table.
Look at that.
I'm happy with 4. It does get pretty tricky about whether people decide to have 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, or progressive and independent and Republican.
I just think it keeps it balanced like
Yeah.
everybody's looking for. That's just my opinion.
I think I think 4, I agree with 4 because it really helps if people can check in quickly with a couple of counties that they know well. And just 6 people, it feels daunting.
So how you break it down?
So you don't, the Speaker of the House would and the Committee on Committees. I just want to make sure we're clear,
Yeah.
Like, we wouldn't get to decide. all
4
the
to
time.
4 is a no.
Sure.
Yeah. I have no problem with 4, that's very important. Okay, right on.
We're switching that?
Yes, yeah,
I had a question, but it goes back a little bit. It was in the last version, 4.1, we struck some commission responsibilities. A lot of commission responsibilities, and there was a couple in there that I'm not quite sure we wanted. We should at least look at to make sure we're very cognizant of deleting them. One was the analysis of the current use of private therapeutic schools.
What page?
Well, that's it. See, it's the last version. Now it's gone. It was lined out before. And I'm not sure if some of these big tickets should be just completely deleted. It's the current use of analyzing the current use of private therapeutic schools. So,
Sorry, what page are you on?
well, this was Friday's version.
I think I have that right here.
we have that in later. Am I right somewhere else in reference to the therapeutic schools and
Yes.
the report?
In section 18, starting on page 40, is the report back to you all from the Agency of Education about the state of special education delivery. And again, I'm working off of draft 5.2 on page 43. The entire report, it talks a lot about therapeutic schools. But the new language to this draft is on page 43, lines 20-21. Recommendations for the oversight of therapeutic schools within the school governance framework, both at state and local level, including whether the agency has capacity, et cetera. There is lots of other data to be collected in this report, but it's from the agency, not the commission.
Okay, good. Thank you. That's all good. The second question, the second analysis that they were going to do was the impact of healthcare costs on the education. And that was struck out. And again, it's a big moving part. Just think the commission, somebody should be taking a look at that. If it's not the commission, who is?
It's a huge driver.
It's not going away.
No, yeah, not. Sure that it's, the impact is almost quantifiable pretty quickly.
Including recommendations on whether or if what changes should be made to contain costs. Is how we heard about this.
So in broad strokes, and we'll come back to that, the problem, by the way, given that the commission's work was really about funding and we're doing it, the commission role was pretty, try to figure out a way to give something productive to do and how to really take a look at that relationship between the board and the agency and which one. So that was part of the rationale for that was to zero them in on something that would actually be directed. But having said that, no problem at all. Do all the that.
This is the commission's work.
Yeah.
I mean, we've given them a shorter timeline and I would like to have them focused on things we really want to hear from them. And with this, I mean, the same groups brought healthcare ideas to the table this session, and reference-based pricing made it into the healthcare bill. So I feel like the Health and Welfare Committee has done its work to hear what would been the overall cost curve on healthcare. Healthcare expenses are high for everyone, so I just feel like they could spend a lot of time on this without a whole lot of value. And if they don't spend a lot of time of it, they won't be any value anyway, because
So reference-based pricing came through health and welfare.
yes, S-126.
And here there's an opportunity for a independent commission to take a look at whether that's the right solution. Being that, we've seen the cost of healthcare rise over a period of 10 to 12 years. So clearly people in seats aren't solving the problem. I'd like someone outside to take a look and see if they come up with anything different than reference-based, because we're latching our star on reference-based pricing.
I would say there's more to S-126 than reference-based pricing. It's a observer in our hospital system. I mean, there's just certain things we know factually are driving the costs, and it's not what's driving healthcare costs isn't anything specific to the education system.
That's correct.
So it's in a larger bill.
So, okay, so my only reaction is we have an independent body ready, teed up to look at this and how it directly impacts the education system, not the state in general. And I think we ought to allow these guys to do some work. And if they come up with the same recommendation, that's great. But to delete that effort and hope that the health and welfare efforts are sufficient, we may be missing an opportunity.
I don't care.
Fun with that in that fact, we won't do.
And if the timeline is now insufficient because we shortened it, just lengthen that response for that section. We can.
But put back in and look at it next time. And we've timeline for now.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So that piece, that charge was under the education finance system bucket. And most of that analysis was being done by the education finance subcommittee, which this draft and the House's version did away with that subcommittee. So do you want to reinstate that subcommittee just for the purposes of looking at healthcare? Or do you want to make the healthcare charge a charge of the whole commission?
Yeah, we could make it a whole commission. They can still have a subcommittee if they want to.
Yes, however, the language allowing the subcommittee to appoint non-members to allowing the commission to appoint non-members to the subcommittee, the finance subcommittee is struck. So they would only be able to have a finance subcommittee made up of commission members, which is a policy choice. I'm just highlighting how that language was built into the commission to begin with. Okay.
Next.
I'm on page 15. Sorry, Mr. Chair, I didn't have a chance to talk to you today about this piece. I think I said last week that, page 15, line 15. Page 15, line 15. I said last week, we haven't had the V's that are the business officers or administrators in VASBO. And so given that, they reached out to me this weekend, and I don't need to change this language right now, but I do think as the process goes along, maybe after Thursday, we could have the business officers in to speak, just because I think they are very sympathetic to the idea of maintaining the access to independent schools within the districts, but they they have valuable information on how inefficient supervisory unions are, that they just are lots of boards having to check in with each other. And I think I just hope we could leave the possibility open that we achieve the same goal of protecting our deeply ingrained independent schools without creating what I might call like the Rube Goldberg of, education finance. Like,
We could,
it's really that sentence that says like you have to have
well, we
supervisors.
should say, we could say all recommendations shall consider the maintenance of.
Sure, yes.
Okay.
And because I think that the committee could have a really rich conversation about like, do you need supervisory unions to get this right?
Yeah.
That would be great. Thank you. And we want
Shall
to,
consider the maintenance of the use of,
Sure.
okay.
like to move on?
Yeah.
Okay. The next change occurs on page 16, but we're gonna stay on page 15 just to orient you. This is on line 20 under subsection C on page 15. The proposed school district boundaries and supervisory union boundaries shall increase access to excellent educational opportunities for all students. And then we've condensed some of the language here on page 16. Gain efficiencies and potential cost savings without harming educational opportunities or community connections. And then on line 3, instead of maximize opportunities to, I believe it was maintain or create local elementary schools, it's to support local elementary schools, central middle schools, and regional high schools.
Let's support. That were the modern ones.
We took out modern, yep, but we also changed, let's see.
Yeah, we just struck our version 421.
Okay, yep. Struck for modern and we replaced it with to support. Are we ready to keep going?
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you, Wes.
It doesn't like that.
Okay. Yes.
so no further changes until we get to page 17. And this is talking about the alternative consolidation process. There were 5 goals here and we've collapsed them to 3. So I'm on line 4, page 17. The process recommended by the task force shall be designed to encourage local decisions and actions that provide high quality, substantially equal educational opportunities statewide, maximize operational efficiencies that result in education costs that parents, voters, and taxpayers can afford, and then promote transparency and accountability remains unchanged. No changes to the public engagement subdivision or subsection. And then some slight changes to the assistance section. So just making it clear that I'm on page 17, line 18, the task force may also retain the services of one or more independent third parties to provide contracted resources as the task force deems necessary. And then on page 18, line 1, subsection F, we get into the deliverables. So draft 4.1 had 2 deliverables, legislation and a map. And now we're going to a report and a map. So on or before December 15th, 2025, that was previously November 15th, 2025. The task force is required to, and then starting on line 6, details what the report should have. So it's a written description of the boundaries and the alternative consolidation process, along with essentially the methodology. What are the policy decisions that went at arriving that were made to arrive at both the proposed boundaries and the alternative consolidation process. And how do each of those final recommendations meet the requirements that are laid out above in the sections that we've already walked through. And then the map is still required to have all of the same.
And there's nothing to prevent legislation getting underway at the same time.
No.
Yeah,
And then the map is still required to have all of the same things, but we've added on page 19, the grand list value within each proposed school district boundary. I've highlighted on page 19, line 14 in blue, just because I think this is a decision point that you can keep just July 15th, or you can push back, just highlighting it as a decision point. This draft has it contemplated as July 15th, 2025. And then the task force ceases to exist on January 31st, 2026.
I mean, just for conversation's sake, I'm not wedded to it, but in the potential likelihood that we come back for a veto session and have some time on our hands, might be good to give us the option in June to meet. We've set ourselves up to have a lot of meeting opportunities with 20, I think. So.
Was not, so the boundary is no, on,
Oh, that's true. On or before, I was reading that.
Oh.
So it could be before.
I would
Okay.
encourage you all to speak to the committee on committees on how likely appointments are before July 15th.
Are you, so you think that date is too soon?
Yes.
I think they should know.
I think this will help focus the,
Yeah, they can have that conversation in a
so,
break.
you know, I do worry about this is a limited amount of time altogether.
Mhm, yeah.
Get started sooner rather than later, but, I guess it could get called, but if there's no members, then nobody to be there, but hopefully we'll have members appointed by then. If it's part of the legislation, and you're right, we'll have that discussion with the committee and committees and with the speaker's office. Yep, okay.
Compensation reimbursement normal per diem. This draft is contemplating not more than 16 meetings. And then an appropriation of $100,000 to the Office of Legislative Counsel for the hiring of one or more consultants.
So this was from discussions I had with a combination of JFO and Ledge Council leadership, that we really might want to hire somebody, a specialist, and as well as having somebody to be like committee assistant between the two. The $100,000 number would pretty much make it possible. Okay. John, for that actually concludes the section, right? Yes, section 3.
Yes.
And we have John for a 1 hour, as I understand it. So we'll make it. Switch back. Now we're back to the number of section. Section.
Because you can figure that.
John Gray, Office of Legislative Counsel. See if I can get everything up and running. Will, has the proposal been posted on the? No, so nice for this. Thank you.
You tell them when you're ready, John.
For sure. Should be up. Thank you. Yep, I see it. Here we are. Zoom in a little bit. So just for orientation purposes, you're seeing this as a standalone document that captures all of the education finance provisions that came from the House with tweaks proposed today. So this does include things that the committee is presumably not touching, like the later sections related to SDS, the supplemental district spending, just so that when you do have your amendment go out, you aren't stripping a bunch of things out of the bill. But this is included as standalone language here, so that you can talk about these provisions, and then once agreed, can be dropped into the actual draft of H454. But that way we don't have to dual track the ed policy pieces and the ed finance pieces at the same time. So we start on page 1 with a section related to tuition.
Also, there's no, I haven't seen this either. We've all seen this for the first time.
So this is describing the allowable tuition, essentially what is going to a receiving school for students under this new foundation formula proposal. So what you see here is tuition per student shall be paid by the district in which the student is a resident, and the district shall pay to a receiving school for each of those students attending a receiving school an amount equal to the product of the base amount and the tuition factor. So I'm going to pause before I go to the definition section to explain what this is, to help orient. What the House version said is that a district would pay to a receiving school for each resident student an amount that's equal to the base amount multiplied by 1 plus the sum of any weights applicable to that student. The intuitive way that we've been talking about this is that money follows the student. So if you're a student with particular needs, that would carry those weights with you, and those dollars that track the weighting for the student would follow the student to a receiving school. So that was what the House proposed. This is a slight tweak to that proposal. And so let me talk about how that works. On page 2, we have a couple of definitions here. And before I dive into the language, I'm just going to explain what the concept is here. Instead of having 1 plus the sum of all weights applicable to that student, what this proposes is that for one of the weights, the economic disadvantage weight, there's a slight nuance. And so if you look at the tuition factor definition, it's the sum of 1 plus all weights applicable to the resident student other than the economic disadvantage weight. So picking up all the weights, but that economic disadvantage weight, and then creating under subdivision C, this special weight for economic disadvantage. So this is a weight calculated by multiplying the economic disadvantage weight by the economic disadvantage composition. So what this is doing, and I'll scroll up to economic disadvantage composition, this is creating an economic disadvantage weight that tracks the composition of the district from which the student is drawn. So for instance, a student that's going to a receiving school would receive all the weights that are applicable to it, and then would receive an economic disadvantage weight that is a proportion of the economic disadvantage weight, and that proportion is determined based on what the composition of the district is. So the way to think about this is, if you were an economic disadvantage student and you carry this nuanced economic disadvantage weight with you, you would actually carry with you less dollars than you would if you had the standard weight, right? And similarly, if you were not an economic disadvantage student, you would also carry this economic disadvantage weight. That's the composition of your district. So it's a if you are not an economic disadvantage student, because you're receiving this tuition factor, which is 1 plus the sum of all those weights plus this nuanced economic disadvantage weight, you would still carry with you a portion of economic disadvantage dollars, because you would be picking up this weight calculated by multiplying the economic disadvantage weight by the composition of the district. Basically what this does is it's a way of saying that in any case, a student that's going here, students that not going here, staying within, it's not paying tuition to a receiving school, they will end up with a weight that is meant to capture the composition of the district rather than their individual particular characteristics.
The asserted rationale for this is that it might be simpler for the receiving schools, I think, to check the figures so that they don't have to, with each student that comes in, tally up what the particular economic disadvantage weight is. But what I would offer is that in the event to produce this economic disadvantage composition type factor, you're going to have to count the students anyway. Like it's going to have to be done at some point. So, but this is an attempt to, I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong, to create some simplicity on the receiving school side, but just know that this will have effects on the money available to receiving schools and those not going to receiving schools, right? Because it's a limited pool of money. You're not changing the amount that's raised to address this particular factor. You're just talking about where the money goes. And so instead of saying the simple statement, money follows the student, you would have to describe it slightly differently. Money follows the student, but for the economically disadvantaged students, they get this composition of the district type weight.
But it's more than the economically disadvantaged students that get the weight.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's where I need explanation because I don't get that. Why would we do that?
It was only for, I think, simplicity. I have no feelings about this one or the other. It's not, it was to be, because sometimes it'll be more, sometimes it'll be less.
Right.
It was just to make it simple.
That seems harder. It seems less simple than just giving them the economic disadvantage weight.
And I'm very happy with just the way we had set out to do, which was just the money follows the student, and that's fine. So why don't we go back to that?
Yeah, and I think the thing there on the simplicity front is just the counting will have to be done no matter what. That's how you produce
It was
those.
simplicity that actually turns out not to be a student. Yeah.
Well, that is great because this is probably the most complicated thing that I'm going to talk about today. So,
You did a good job.
So you go back to
this will be
Yeah, go back to the.
for sure. Use the
So, you know,
Yeah.
money follows the student unless the district decides otherwise. I mean, the district is in a position to determine
Oh, yes.
this sum of money actually gets spent, you know, to that school, to that school, to that school based on their
Yeah,
strategic goal.
within operating schools, works that way.
Yeah, I think there's like two distinct things here, and it's easy to a school district is receiving a pot of money, and there's not like this prescription as to how you use that, right? You'd receive all of this money that is attributed to the weighting factors per student, right? You're getting these extra dollars because of economic disadvantage, but the school district can choose to use that money in a particular way. I think when folks are saying money follows the student, in this context, they're talking about what does a receiving school, a tuition student, what does that receiving school receive? And in this case, if the district would pay, and if we're going back to the House version, what they would pay is what you would imagine. It's their weighted base amount per student. It's the base multiplied by 1 plus the sum of the weights applicable to that student. And that gives you a particular dollar amount that tracks all of the characteristics of that student as recognized under the weighting section. Which is the other thing that we're going to do that's complicated, but will only track the discussions that you've been having. Because what the language we're going to come to next does is just puts into statute what you've been discussing is scenario B2.
So if I can, this section 21 doesn't have anything, it's solely focused on tuitioning non-operating students.
It's just about the tuitioning. Exactly. I mean, it will depend on what the vision of tuitioning ends up being, but this describes what a district pays to a school that is taking a tuition student. That's what this section does. And I think that you guys have talked some in the ed policy sections about usually other changes, tuitioning. I know there's a tuition transition proposal in one of the sections.
And there's no factor for middle school versus high school versus elementary school.
We're going to come to that.
Okay.
There are weighting factors related to 6 through 8 and 9 through 12.
And that would follow the student. with
Exactly.
Tuition.
Exactly.
All the weights are the same.
Goals ought to be just the same as well. It's got the same dollars, more or less.
Here's where I am trying to still mentally thread the needle around the money substantially following the student in any context where they have that weighting. And it it kind of helps me to think about it in the same way that this is structured, where let's say we end up with 2 high schools in a district and one has the majority of the English language learning students. If the money would follow the student to that school, that would make me feel better than if it just went to the district.
Oh, yeah,
Does that make sense?
yeah,
Like, so you have now a countywide district and you have a poverty stricken area. I think the poverty weight money should follow the student to that school.
literally.
And yeah, it doesn't mean their classroom, I don't want to get too specific, but it should go to that school where the student is.
Unless strategically, it's not where the district wants to take that school, that student, and that school. I mean, somehow they've got to make it.
But then the
priority.
student would be somewhere else.
Otherwise, it's completely status quo
I don't think it's status quo.
because the student's already in the school. They're gonna get the money. The money follows the student. There's no incentive to do anything other than the status quo.
The problem is that we're asking to create much larger district. And the only way I would support much larger district is knowing that where there are hotspots of poverty and international students and things, the money is still staying in that part of the county.
I thought we said the money follows the students. So
Well, in the school, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, if you have a countywide district, sending it to that school is the only way to have it stay close to the student.
So what, if I could try, I think what you're worried about is that within a larger district, operating district, you could have a handful of schools. One of the schools has most of the ESL kids, but the district decides to spend the money elsewhere. And the ESL kids for whom that money is allocated or raised wouldn't get the benefit. That's what you're
Yeah.
concerned about, I think.
Yeah.
So then the question becomes, whether we trust the boards that have been elected. That's one that I don't know the answer to this, but I'm just trying to pull apart and figure out what we're actually.
I actually
But
think
I get you.
not letting it follow the student maintains the status quo, because you could prop up a smaller school that doesn't have as many students, that's not functioning as well, with money that was supposed to go to poor kids and English learners.
So the real point is that I think you're getting at is you want to make sure that the kids for whom the money is raised benefit from it.
that the money actually follows the child.
Yeah,
And maybe
that's
there's a
exactly
different way
right.
to get at this without getting too prescriptive.
But I guess what we're doing in the tuitioning is following the child with the money.
That says it relates to.
I think it's a
Well,
beautiful
let's say,
system for everyone.
let me try to give a hypothetical. So let's say a large district has got pockets of ESL and poverty and what have you. And they decide, the school board from the district decides to spend 95% of the ESL money on the ESL students, but 5% on creating a language lab in a different school for whatever reason, for whatever strategic reason they decide to. So if the money follow the student 100%, they can't make those strategic decisions.
That's not what the money's for. It's not for a language lab at another school.
Well, it could be a language lab still in the district, but for English language learners, but not necessarily for that one cadre of students in that one particular
Then they
school.
can use unrestricted funds, not weighted funds that are supposed to go to students to help them learn English.
Okay, let's take a high school versus an elementary school. So the weighting factor is 1.2, whatever it is. There's more money to go to the school, but the district decides that they need to make additions onto a particular school to improve the quality of education, et cetera. And instead of using 100% of high school factored money, they decide to put that money into something else, which is for the good of the district. But it's not 100% following the particular student. In this case, let's say they decide not to spend 100% of the money to a high school. They take 95% goes there, but 5% goes towards a middle school expansion or some other.
Okay, so
Priority.
let's say 75% of the money follows the student to the school. Because that's the lowest I would go in imagining that you can take the money away from the kids who are supposed to have it and put it
How
somewhere
about
else.
trusting the school board to make that? knowing that,
The foundation formula is us generally trusting them and verifying through weights. And some school districts are out to get a lot more money that's supposed to go to helping kids in poverty or English language learners. And I would want a substantial majority of that money to go to the school where those kids are being served. That doesn't seem very far-fetched to me.
oh, not far-fetched, but it's not a perfect system. And I don't think we should try to legislate. If you put in the words, money follows the student, hypothetically. Yeah, everybody's hands are tied. I mean, it's very
So,
clear.
but you don't agree 75% of the money?
No, I'm not sure what the package. I do trust the school board to make the right decision based on the overall geography of students and school facilities and.
I don't think we know that right now.
No,
We
nobody
have-
knows it, but
But I think right now, building in very substantial weight into a new formula and then drawing district maps, it's really important to me that the students who are supposed to get that money for their education have that money available to them in their school with their staff and their instructors and their facilities.
sure, I think fundamentally everyone would agree with that. That's the whole point of the entire exercise. But it's not 100, it can't be 100%.
So
Otherwise,
75.
I'm just trying to make a point. It can't be money follows student. It's not that simple. The decisions are bigger and broader and more complicated than that.
I'm wondering if there's a way to get at this without being prescriptive, either in 10 seconds, may not be strong enough.
Well, like with the EL students, if you got a small school, because that weight for the ELs it's pretty
Huge.
strong.
Yeah.
So if you got a school that has 10 EL students, they aren't going to need all that money, and that money could, because they could hire one, or whereas if you only have 5, and it's all weighting of, so they should be able to use that money all rather than just that one
But-
student
But that could be at the school, because if you have
still at the school.
a significant portion of EL students in your school, or even
So what you're getting at,
Lot is-
whatever school that child goes to,
Yeah.
that money gets spent at that school.
yes,
Even though your superintendent might go, boy, that's, we have plenty at this school. And I can't touch any of that money because it has to stay in the school, where I could really use $100,000.
well, they could always use, that's the problem we have right now, is you can move money around to prop up whatever you want, and this is allowing kids to vote with their own dollars. This is allowing those families to say, this school's serving my kid really well. And that school should get the money to keep serving kids of that population really well.
Then don't we make inequality?
Well, let's just keep thinking through from that.
I get where you're coming from.
If
I'm
we believe in
trying
the
to
way
work
you-
it with it, but it's like,
Yeah.
I want to understand if you have a bunch of EL students just taking them out of random and they're going to one school. And that school is benefiting because they're able to educate those children with one teacher. And they have 10 students, and then the other school has only 5. Now you have an extra, and you're spending the same amount on the teacher. Now you have all this excess weight money. What do you do with that? You're saying spend it right there at the school?
I mean, what you could, if you're worried about 5 kids here and 10 kids here, you could figure out a way to use the money on all of them efficiently.
So actually, I realized just now, we only have gone for an hour.
Okay.
I'm not minimizing. This is an important discussion. I need to have it.
I am trying to
Figure out a path forward on this.
I just think this first page unlocked for me how I would want to do things.
That's actually totally legitimate, and we should just continue this discussion. But I realize, sitting here, we gotta get.
For sure, and I don't think,
Yeah, maybe we'll have Tom like.
the concepts that the language you're about to see reflect, you will begin discussing all this time, so this won't be. Unlike the tuition section, which is forever, this should be. Section 22 repeals, this is just repealing old tuition concepts tied to that update to the tuition section. And the change you see here is just to move forward this date in the House. The timeline for rolling out the foundation formula was at July 1, 2029. This has been updated to be July 1, 2027. So there's substantive change from the House, just moving the date forward to align with the other dates in the bill. We jump to section 23, which is the start of your Title 16 state funding of public education chapter. You'll have heard, this is on page 3.
Okay.
You'll have heard me walk through this section on the live stream in Senate Finance, but I'm going to talk about the updates that relate to scenario B2. So if we jump down to page 4, line 13, the definition of base amount. In the House version, this was a per pupil amount of 15,033. And this is now 14,653. This aligns with the numbers that Ezra has been walking you through with that scenario B2 tied to its particular weighting scheme. And just to call out, whatever base amount you choose is tied to a particular set of weights. You couldn't really pick and tweak these independently of each other because the weights will be determined by what basis. So just aligning with that scenario B2. And if folks have questions on the concepts, I'm presuming that it's still live. And if folks had the testimony I did when walking through the bill, but if you have questions on educational opportunity payment, which is what we represent as EOP, the base amount, I'm happy to do those as we go through. Otherwise, I'm just going to hit the highlighted pieces, but get through all the new stuff here. So this is the really substantive section here, section 24, and we're on page 5. This is your weighting section. So 16 VSA, section 2010. This spells out all of the weights that you're building into this foundation formula. What you see at the bottom of that page 5 are repeals for the pupil counts for kindergarten through grade 5 and pre-K, because there's no weighting that is provided associated with those particular grades. And just to call out the structure of this statute, this is tasking the Secretary of Education with conducting counts within school districts of the number of pupils they have that fall within the enumerated categories. So things like grade level, like you see here. And then after they have developed those counts, they apply weights to the number of pupils that fall within those categories. That's what this section is about. And the end result of this section is that you have your weighted long-term membership for the school district, which will just be your long-term membership plus the accumulation of all of the weights that fall into those categories for the school district. The highlighted language will show changes against what the House sent across. So repealing these particular grade level weights, you'll note that in the House version, they repealed all grade level weights. They had no distinction among grade levels for weighting purposes. But you do retain, at the top of page 6, the concepts for grades 6 through 8 and grades 9 through 12, which is lining up with the weights that you provide for those particular factors. Maintaining the same economic disadvantage weight. When you see FPL in the section, that's what we're talking about. The whole poverty level, that's your economic disadvantage weight. Same metrics for achieving that. But you see EL pupils highlighted here. These are your English language learners. The reason this is highlighted is that the House version included distinctions among kinds of English language learners based on their proficiency level, and then additionally, whether they were newcomer or a student with limited or interrupted formal education. So there were a sense of different weights that you could get within the category of EL pupils. This draft maintains the concept of EL pupils, but it just has one call out. You just have one weighting provided for EL pupils, and that is drawn from Tammy Colby's memo, the same memo from which the House's numbers were drawn. You see here on line 10, identifying all school districts that have low population density. Note that in the House version, they removed the weights for sparsity and for small schools, and they replaced those with support grants specific to those pieces. This maintains the current law structure for sparsity and for small schools and provide the weight for those pieces, but it does change the scope of those categories. So low population density here. Under current law, this would pick up potentially, if you look on line 17, areas where you have fewer than 100 persons residing per square mile within the geographic boundaries of the district as of a particular date of determination. Sub 2 and 3 have been struck. So now what you're calling out as a sparse district is a much smaller category. It's just those with fewer than 36 persons per square mile residing within the land areas of that district. So a much narrower category of what would be picked up as a sparse school district under this.
The threshold of 36 people per square mile, is this, we know if this is endorsed by AOE or is this
Yeah, the most responsive answer I have is I believe that this was drawn from the 2019 and 2021 study, right? So 36 is current law. It's one of the categories of current law, but if your question is, do they have a position on reducing from that 100 to 36? I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah. Yeah, just validating that that's the right number for this significant legislative change. Pushes through. I don't know the answer.
I think you may recall from Ezra's presentation that if you use the VSBA regions that were just the model used for that particular thing, I think that only one district, if I have this correct, would actually meet this particular criteria.
Wait, I'm sorry, can you just say that one more time? Give a sentence.
If you use, and it is entirely hypothetical, but for the modeling that you've seen, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Ezra, but I believe that Ezra made his presentation on the different scenarios, those B1, B2, and A and the like, based on a particular geographic model of the boundaries, and that was the VSBA regions for like the 12 or 13 numbered districts. And if you use this sparsity definition, which is just fewer than 36 persons per square mile, and you were using that hypothetical VSBA model, which again, it's entirely hypothetical. We don't know what the school district boundary is going to be. But if you did use those, only one of the VSBA regions would meet this criteria, meaning only one school district would be entitled to have students with this weight.
That's what he's given my person.
Ezra Holman, Joint Fiscal Office, Kingdom North was the only VSBA region with less than 36. So if that was the line you drew for regions, that's the only one. And that's why in my testimony today, the base went down when you expanded to current districts, because you have small pockets, like a district that would be absorbed in central Vermont's VSBA region and therefore excluded from sparsity on its own. It still meets that sparsity definition of less than 36, to just round out what John is saying here. So the construct does matter on who gets that. But yes, that's correct, John.
And do you have a rough estimate of how many would fall under that category with the current districts?
Under 36?
Yeah.
I can get that number for you.
Is it easy to get, or is it going to be a?
It's relatively easy to get.
Okay, thanks.
And just again, to reorient that we're maintaining here a weight for sparse districts as opposed to some perfect. The next piece you see on page 7, starting on line 4, is identifying all school districts that have one or more small schools. And again, you're changing the scope of the category here. In existing law, you would pick up fewer than 250 pupils, and you would have different weights based on whether it's fewer than 100 or between 100 and 250. What you see struck here on line 7 is that 100 or more pupils, but fewer than 250. So your small schools bucket would again be just fewer than 100 pupils. So again, it's shrinking the scope of what these weights would be available to. And this is, again, every number that's in here is in alignment with the scenario B2 that you have walked through for the last couple of days. So that's what these categories are. It's not new concepts. It's what you've been talking about, but this is what the legislative language looks like. And it uses the same mechanism as the existing law to pick up average 2-year enrollment. Because you're referencing a school rather than a school district, we can't use a pupil count like long-term membership, which is a district-specific concept. We have to use enrollment, which is a school-specific concept. But again, that's what we do under current law. This is just making it fewer than 100 for the small schools. I think we can jump down to the actual weights themselves. So on page 8, and I've created subdivision headers to help make these more identifiable. So your first is your grade level weights, and you receive an additional weight based on if you are in grades 6 through 8 or in grades 9 through 12. You get that 0.08 if in 6 through 8 and 0.12 if in 9 through 12. So reflecting what is taken to be the higher cost for high school students. Your economic disadvantage weight, this aligns with the weight that is proposed by the House, that 1.02 weight. I've just created a subdivision heading to make this easier. On page 9, you have a flat EL weight. So recall that I the House version made this distinction, distinguish between folks who are tested at particular English language proficiency levels and whether they're a newcomer or a student with limited or interrupted formal education. So you had something like 5 total weights available. For EL students, this would be a flat weight, that 1.39 figure. Again, that's scenario B2. It's drawn from the same memo from which those proficiency level and newcomer weights have been drawn. It's just an alternative to that kind of more broken out pupil score weights.
I keep not being clear, like if we support the broken out weights, but we're keeping it simple for now, like did we strike out the House language about the broken out weight?
If
This
this
is like
replaces,
6 levels of ELL and new American and a new American weight.
under that concept, an EL pupil could receive their proficiency level weight plus that newcomer or student with limited or interrupted formal education weight.
But their proficiency level weight is more specific to their need.
Yeah, you can, if you even just look at the numbers, it starts at, for level 1, your lowest proficiency level. I think I just received here.
I guess, like, did we make a decision that we don't want?
Not necessarily.
No,
You can-
okay.
you can, if you want to look back and look at those weights, we can do that.
I don't remember looking at the actual language of the formula from the House, but just one of the documents that.
So this was the Tammy Clee
Yes.
recommendation was that, so we suggested this, frankly, this sort of was like the Tammy Clee numbers, mostly in the House bill, and then just a couple of tweaks that. So leaving as much intact as possible, but
Right.
it was just leaving it intact.
The way that she had presented her numbers were as sets of alternatives, right? You could do this broken out version, or you could do a flat version, and this was the.
And she said they're both correct. That's coming back to me now.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's right.
139 is the flat.
Yeah, 139 is the flat, and then there's also the variables.
so,
I was just gonna say not to muck up the waters here, but if the party follows the student, it should follow the student specific to the need,
That's
not
exactly right.
generically to the need.
that's exactly right.
English language, because there's such a
Yes,
huge range.
yes. I completely agree. So if you look at us maybe endorsing the special education weights in the future, those vary greatly depending on the student's need. And I think that should follow the student. I just think the money should follow the student to the school where they're receiving accommodations and support.
I agree with that, but I want to discuss it with you later.
Um,
So I would vote to go back to the 6+ life formula.
what does it take to take a look at that as for a second?
So I think, as I've mentioned in some of my testimonies, the issue right now is when you get down to smaller units, you have that privacy concern where if there are only 2 children at a school that are EL, they can't tell us the exact number within the category because of privacy concerns. So that is why I use the flat weight, because otherwise I would just be essentially just kind of guessing at the level of proficiency or the number of students. So that was why.
But you don't need to know it by the school, you just need to know it by the district.
We had the same issue at the districts too, just because the number of the population is so slim once you get outside of
So let's say that there was 3 tier 1, and I'm just making this up, 3 tier 1 in this huge district,
Mhm.
and that there were 100 tier 6 in the same district. That would help you. Wouldn't it? I mean, why, you don't need to know the school, you just need to know the district.
Right, so
These are tiny.
Then it's hard for the money to follow student.
Well, so, okay, I always saw the JFO need to have just like a placeholder number as separate from making the policy decision around how we would do this. And I think we can do that. We can do that, right? Like we don't have to worry about the ultimate difficulty in getting what would otherwise be private information. We can just endorse the different levels, but use 1.39 as a placeholder because that's what it's designed to be, is a relatively similar amount of money that would generally differ only when you have maybe a population of people who are just at a very proficient but not quite their level or something.
So how does that work using it as a placeholder, or is what we could do would be to put in the intent section, that is our intent to switch to?
Know that the bill language would use all 7 categories. But then when we look at data from JFO, that's supposed to help us make broad decisions. They're using 1.39 as a placeholder for their formula.
But then doesn't that make it impossible then to figure out a base amount and everything we need to have on this bill in order?
The base amount was changed.
Practical matter though, we would be able to see that as we wouldn't know, and therefore we actually couldn't put forward a bill. Because everything moves. Anytime you tweak anything, it changes the base, it changes all the other
Oh, you mean
calculations.
to get it at 1.88? I
Yeah.
think the 1.39 is designed to be a pretty good proxy. If you have those students moving through the district, then you're averaging out. The 1.39 is an average of the general amount that ELL is using in each district to educate students of all proficiency levels.
So I just want to make sure we can actually do this. Go. Shula, you have thoughts?
Sure. I think to Ezra's point, the EL data by level is suppressed, meaning that any count below 11 is not shared with JFO. AOE has that data. It's just suppressed. The 1.39 is a placeholder weight in the modeling because of the suppressed data. Then the question becomes, do you want the tiered weights? If so, that's a policy decision. If you move to the tiered weights, there is a chance that without a recalculation of the base, it will not equal 1.88 billion. There could be a shift in funding dependent on the levels of EL students in certain proficiency categories.
I'll just say, like, as a not a fiscal analyst, it is a mental exercise we're doing for 3 years from now. We're not going to have the same number of ELL students. I can almost guarantee that. So we are doing this all based on a mental exercise of what our student population will look like in 3 years. And I would rather put the right weights in than worry that we didn't get like a magical number exactly right that is going to change.
Yeah, I've got no objection what you're trying to get to. But if we put it into the bill, then the numbers we have in, like the base, will almost by definition not be accurate. Is that true?
I don't have that. I guess, Julie Ricker, JFO. I don't think I introduced myself the first time. The question is, JFO is doing a modeling exercise that is reflecting the policy decisions to the extent that we are able to do it based off of assumptions and data availability. I mean, one of the other huge outstanding assumptions that we're working within, right, are the district boundaries. What Ezra showed earlier today is dependent on the district boundaries. You have different bases to get 1.88. The district boundaries still haven't been determined. So I guess it ultimately is a question of what is the committee's priority in terms of the reflection of the numbers to the work that Ezra's doing.
So Senator Robbins was suggesting that we put in the language with the tiers, but use the 1.39 as the number. Will that work?
I it just gets down to the
So,
modeling,
Right.
the modeling reflecting to the best that we can model
It's an imprecise proxy.
until we get better data.
Right.
But we're living,
Yeah.
living in a world of assumption right now.
Right.
Um, let's just try that on that. And that's just a language change at this point then, right? Using the same, okay. Okay.
Um, next is our sparsity weight, and just to remind everyone, this is a restricted category as against what is in current law, right? It's dropped down to that sub 36, which is what, was being asked about earlier. So sparsity weight, you just have one weight instead of having distinguished weights among fewer than 36, 36, 55, 55, but fewer than 100, you just have one weight for that sub 36. And that's your 0.13 weight here that you see consistent with, E2.
So weeks.
So I think the objective of today is to get through the language and not talk about the concept of sparsity versus small school. You can leave that for another.
Well, we're gonna lose John, so I guess let's get through.
I would like to get that.
Yeah.
Next is your small school weight. And note that this, the condition for collecting the small school weight, which is maybe where some of the discussion was just headed, is starting on lines 19. If the number of persons per square mile residing within the land area of the geographic boundaries of a school district as of July 1 of year termination is fewer than 55, then for each pupil listed under the subdivision, school district receives an additional weighting amount of 0.21 for each pupil included in the small school's average 2-year enrollment. The reason I walked through this conditional language at the bottom of page 9 is just to call out this is different than that sparsity category, which was the fewer than 36 record. This is fewer than 55 to fix the small school weight. So the condition for getting the small school weight is to meet a kind of sparsity restriction, but it is not as restrictive as the fewer than 36 that you saw in sparsity weight. So this was the note that you may recall on Ezra's slide that talked about if fewer than 55, and you can see the zeros put into the other sparsity weights. And Senator Rom Hinsdale had asked the question, is there a typo thinking that it was the sub 55 wasn't lining up with the weights that were provided here? And Ezra was describing, actually, it's just that there's become conditioned for getting access to the small school weights. That's what this reflects. So just to call it, it is a sparsity restriction, but it is not as a restrictive of a sparsity condition that exists for that sparsity. That is your weighting section. And if the last piece I think to note here is that the House version did include special education weights, which were distinguished between categories of disabilities for particular children. And so you would receive different amounts of weighting depending on the category that you fall into. Those are not in this draft. This relies on the census block grant remaining in place. Unlike the House version, which repealed the census block grant and replaced with special education weights, this sticks with the census block grant and does not have special education weights. Again, all of this is just conforming to the scenario B2 that you've been flying through. Maybe pause my screen share so I don't cause whiplash because I'm trying to find the next changes. I may jump to page 14 just to talk about this reserved section. We're working on concepts for a transition, but don't have something yet fully ready. But just know that there's thinking happening on the front of what happens in fiscal years 28, 29, and 2030. So that's still being ironed out.
And the idea is roughly to have districts go down by a 30-year or 3 years and up, and those going up the same thing slowly, more slowly. So it's a transition in both directions. That's the concept. And one actually helping to fund the other. Slower increase.
So we're gonna try to put that in mind.
Yeah, that's what it's reserved is working on in 2026.
I think that maybe the extent of picking up the scenario B2 changes as the novel tuition factor, which we're gonna stick back to that House version. If you would like for me to talk through remaining sections or you have questions as to what's going on, note that this draft is much bigger than what this committee is touching, right? It does contain all of the provisions that I drafted for the House version, so it picks up the property tax rate pieces. But I'm happy to talk through.
Weights and means. right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
If it's helpful for me to jump to particular sections just to talk about what's going on there, I'm happy to do that. Or if you guys wanted to return to the discussions that you were having.
Yeah, Senator Weeks wanted to follow up on the other discussions, bigger, so we'll hold it for that. Senator Weeks wanted to follow up on Smart City versus.
Yeah, so we started this conversation last week. And it's all about. So we have Smart City weights, geographic distribution of students, can have an effect on the school size. Could be a small school based on, large geographic area, a small population. Or it could be, to the point that was made earlier, that there's an adequate school in that particular region, and they don't. So I'm not sure if an area needs both a sparsity weight and a small school weight, or it needs a sparsity weight. It's an area that's got sparsity and small schools. Those are the folks that need some assistance, not just the pure fact that they're sparse or pure fact that they're small. It could be small school in a geographically dense area, but they choose to be small. So I'm a little conflicted on whether we need both of these criteria. And if they're both kind of simultaneously self-supporting or supporting each other. I'm struggling with that.
So so you're wondering whether we should drop even the sparsity category or below 36?
No?
Oh, okay.
So sparsity leads to small schools.
Yeah, yep.
I get that. Sparsity that doesn't have small schools, that have larger schools. We understand why there's a weight for the sparsity area. Or if there's small schools without being in a sparse area, that too shouldn't have, my simple thinking, shouldn't have an additional weight. Only if they're sparse and small.
In terms of language, that's a very easy thing to do. You just don't have an independent sparsity weight. You just
More of a concept of it, I think.
Yeah.
You kind of need to wrestle with for a minute or two, just to have that conversation. I don't think if they experience sparsity and small schools, there's an issue with each other. Not one or the other.
So I mean, what if it's a very rural town that does happen to have a school, and the next nearest school is an hour and a half away?
Well, that's sparsity and small school combined. I support that 100%.
I thought you just said you had an issue with it.
I have an issue with only sparsity or only small schools as a weight. So give me a scenario where it's one, if it's not both, if it's only one or the other, why they would need additional funds. That's what I'm wrestling with. But I'm not saying no one can create a scenario. I just have.
I think this would be a good area to break some scenarios out to better understand the impact of combining or not combining. I think we made the right decision in taking out minimum class sizes, but in favor of trying to level the playing field about how much money districts get and how much, a level playing field means you don't necessarily get money just for having a small school. You get the money because you're geographically remote or some reason.
Right.
So I have not been able to wrap my head around how these work together in different scenarios in like Essex County versus somewhere else.
Yeah, nor have I. So to Senator Weeks' point, when we took out the weight for 36 to 55 for people, and yet retained that category for the purpose of determining whether the small school get away. That's what he's talking about. We did it. And I think the question becomes that you're asking is, should we also eliminate the weight for below 36 in its own right? and have it count only if toward the small school, if the small school is within that area. Yeah, and I have to say, there's an inherent logic to that.
Because that school is so isolated, it's not benefiting from the scale of sharing services or food or whatever.
Yeah, it gets the small school allotment or the small school weight because it is in a sparse area.
I understand that now.
And a lot of times in sparse areas, they're going to regional high schools. So the way,
Right.
or so the sparsity is really kind of it's a,
Do we only get the sparsity for elementary and middle?
so we just figure out how to get at this. And so when you think about modeling, we have to make sure it's an amount of work that can get accomplished. So let's think about how to do that. Well, one thing to do, Ezra, what would it take to take a look at what happens if we remove the sparsity allocation from the 36 to 0? And so any school, small school of 100 or less that was within an area of 55 or less per square mile would get that small school weight. But if it's not there, it wouldn't. And we then take away the weights for sparsity in of themselves. What would it take to do that? Take a look at what that would do to the model.
So just to clarify, so there would be no sparsity weights in the state, but if you were a small school with 55 or fewer
Yeah.
people per square mile, you would receive a small school. weight.
Yes.
Yeah, that's certainly something I can do for you.
Would it work just as well? Because I have it would be a lot simpler if we did it on the model of the superintendents, whatever.
It's not any simpler than like the analysis I did for you today was based on current law districts, so I can apply it to the current law districts. It's just expanding your parameter.
It might, well, let me ask you, okay, we get the same, yeah, whatever. I want to make it doable. I want to be sure what we're doing is doable.
Sure.
And
So if you would like a,
is that,
I'm confused. The thing I'm confused about is the sparsity captures every town in a given district. Because the towns are what are experiencing sparsity with kids having to be picked up or who knows what, so there's this, if you're talking about a whole district, even if there's a population center, the sparsity of the towns around that matters, right? So that influences the weighting of the students. I don't know. I'm trying to figure out, I mean, maybe, Ezra is a wizard or something, or just being nice. But what I don't understand is how you would pick out the small school in that district, irrespective of students in other parts of the district who are in the sparsity.
But it's just like English language. It's based on reality. It's based on real numbers.
Mhm.
So if you've got a school that's based in a sparse district and it's a small school, they count.
The money follows the student from the
Money
sparse area.
Yeah, again, theoretically, money follows the student. So that, yeah, I mean, that's the whole premise for the system.
So that community gets a sparsity weight, even if the small school isn't in their isn't in their town, but it's in their district.
Yeah, so I would propose something a little different. I instead of having two different factors, I just say sparse and small. Whatever qualifies as sparse and small gets the weight, not sparse or small.
that's what we're doing.
Right, but it's the whole district still has to be.
But I would just call it sparse and small, and then there's a weight, and that weight goes up to the district. The district, money should follow the student, and they get the credit.
So if let's say we're talking about like a regional high school in a district that's sparsely populated, do they get a weight because they have kids from sparsely populated areas coming to their school?
No, again, it's just me. It's just sparse and small, not sparse or small.
Sparse and small, they're both
Yeah.
combined.
I do have to run, but just to call out the way that the small school weight works is it does require both conditions. It requires both sparsity, but not as restrictive as that 36 or fewer is the sub 55. And that it be a small school, meaning fewer than 100 pupils in its average 2-year enrollment. So that is the way that weight works. If you are pursuing this concept, we would just eliminate the sparsity weight, and maybe you have to change the numbers, but linguistically it would just be that you have.
I think for our constituents, they want to hear sparse.
Oh, you can change. We can change the name.
Right, that's the point. One factor, one name.
The other way, and what we're really talking about is small by necessity.
Right, that's exactly.
But we're
right. We have to
deciding what
put
it
it in
is.
numbers.
Okay.
That's it, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So, go ahead.
sorry, Chair. I'm hearing two slightly different asks between you and the Vice Chair. So I just want to make sure I understand which one you'd like me to model. So from you, what I hear is no sparsity weight at all, but preserving the small school weight in those sparsity tiers. And Vice Chair, I'm hearing that you would like sparsity for only small schools. Is that
So I'm not asking for any mathematical
Oh,
interpretation
okay.
whatsoever. I'm
okay?
trying to figure out language that'll eventually get to you guys, but that's just, I'm trying to get my head around sparse and small.
Okay, my mistake. So just the elimination of sparsity.
Yeah,
You
Let's
got
see
it.
what it does.
All right. Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, thank you for asking. It's important to get those things clear, so that's totally good. Thank you. Now we want to go back to the other discussion.
Well, they're related now.
Okay, great. Okay, yeah. Why don't we take
2 hours.
yeah, why don't we take a short break? So, 310.